Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. The setting sun's rays spilled into the kitchen of Alexander's luxury villa, pulling out a slender shadow. William Alexander stood, his steel-blue eyes watching closely as the catering staff made final preparations for his son Edward's graduation party. As a top surgeon, William's tall 6'2" frame and calm demeanor have earned him the respect of his colleagues in countless surgeries. He sipped the coffee in his hand as he observed the busy scene before him. Dr. Alexander, what do you think about placing the seafood buffet area on the west side of the pool? The catering supervisor approached with a notepad and asked. Yes, William replied with that calm, imperturbable tone so characteristic of the operating room. Remember to keep it under the awning and out of direct sunlight. Through the kitchen window, he saw his wife, Catherine, directing the decorating team. 25 years of marriage had long since taught him to read the subtle cues in her mannerisms, the overly precise gestures, the slightly contrived smiles. At 52, Catherine still maintains her elegant figure and her well-groomed appearance still attracts attention, but William has long since seen through the reality beneath this perfect exterior. "William," said Catherine with a familiar urgency in her voice, her expensive dress rustling as she stomped into the kitchen on her heels. "The living room still needs help with the decorations. Can you dash?" Before she could finish her sentence, William's brother James walked in from the pool area, a hint of deliberateness in his seemingly casual demeanor. "I'll take care of the backyard," James said as he smoothed a hand through his slightly silvery hair. "Those decorative light strings aren't going to hang themselves." William nodded, his expression still calm, but his hand absently touched the cell phone in his pocket. The phone was silently recording, a habit he'd picked up over the past year on the advice of Oliver Mason, a former military security consultant. It was Oliver who first noticed the unusual pattern of Catherine's behavior and some suspicious money transactions. Dr. Alexander, Sarah Wilson, one of the nurses in his clinic, approached with a stack of papers in her hand. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but these surgery schedules need your approval by Monday." "Of course, Sarah," William gestured as she placed the papers on the kitchen center island. He noticed the displeasure that swept across Catherine's face when she saw the interruption, and a flash of annoyance crossed James' face. His brother had always been a more sociable person, and while William focused on his surgical career, James was content with the role of hospital administrator. Now, watching James' hand graze Catherine's arm if anything, William couldn't help but ponder how this easygoing personality was a perfect disguise. "Dad." Edward's voice came from the kitchen end, the young man in his graduation gown barely restraining his excitement. "Can you help me with my med school application?" William scrutinized his son's face, the face that looked so much like his own, or that he'd always thought looked so much like him. "What's the problem?" "It's about the personal statement," Edward began to explain, guiding William towards the study as he did so. "I wanted to mention my volunteer experience at the hospital, but wasn't sure how to phrase it." Through the windows in the den, William has a clear view of the pool area. He watched as James reappeared, showing excessive familiarity in a home that was not his. Oliver's security cameras, installed 6 months ago, are silently recording every detail. "Edward," William spoke carefully, "tell me about volunteering at the hospital, all of it." His son stirred uneasily. "What do you mean?" "The hours you worked while I was in surgery, the hours you spent with Uncle James." Edward's cell phone suddenly rang, his girlfriend Amy's name flashing on the screen. "I've got to take this call," he sighed in relief and walked quickly out of the den. William returned to the kitchen, counting his every step precisely. The catering staff has moved outdoors, leaving a temporarily empty space. Through the window, he saw James pull Catherine behind a decorative latticework, their intimate demeanor clearly not the first time. William's grip on his coffee cup tightened, but his expression remained calm. 20 years of experience in difficult surgeries taught him the importance of calm hands and perfect timing control. Catherine's laugh came across the courtyard, shrill and amused. "20 years of family vacations, and you really think we're just close?" she said to James, apparently not noticing William standing at the window. "The best disguise is to hide brightly." William was always too busy saving lives to notice what was going on in his own home, James replied, his hand still resting on Catherine's waist. They finally noticed William standing at the window. But no shame or guilt passed over Catherine's face, only arrogant satisfaction. Well, her voice came clearly through the open window. It looks like this show can finally be over. The kids call him Daddy when you're not around, you know? Just then Edward appeared at William's side with a mixture of provocation and guilt on his face. I'm sorry, Dad, but we had to pick sides a long time ago. Uncle James was always there. He attended my games and helped me with my homework. And where were you? William smiled, removing the flash drive Oliver had prepared from his jacket pocket. Interesting choice, he said calmly, in a tone that made Edward take an involuntary step back. Let's discuss your definition of family. Come on, Catherine snorted, striding into the kitchen with James close behind. Are we really going to put on this play at Edward's graduation party? You're always so dramatic. Dramatic? William's voice remained steady as he turned to face them. I'd say 20 years of systematic deception would be more dramatic, wouldn't you? James? Though I have to admit, it does take quite a showman's talent to run two households at the same time. James' face changed. You don't know what you're talking about. You're never here, always at the hospital, always in the operating room. Someone has to be here for Catherine, for Edward. You mean, someone had to help themselves to my family, to my accounts? William's smile didn't reach the bottom of his eyes. Those offshore transfers were done subtly. You think being a hospital administrator will keep me from noticing financial anomalies? You're crazy, Catherine snapped, but her hand was trembling with her glass. James is more of a husband and father than you are. William pulled his cell phone out of his pocket and played a recording. James' voice echoed through the kitchen, discussing the details of the account number and transfer date with Catherine. Edward's face turned pale. Mom, what is it? Your mother and uncle have been busy, William said calmly. But you know that, don't you? Edward, these years of hospital internships could be more than just a way to flesh out your medical school application. Asshole, James roared, taking a step forward. You've been spying on us, gathering evidence. It's gathering evidence, William corrected. There's a difference there, although you're obviously not very good at morality. Catherine's laugh was tinged with bitterness. What are you going to do with all this so-called evidence? Destroy our family and our reputation at our son's graduation party? Our family? William's voice held a dangerous undertone. No, Catherine, this hasn't been our family for a long time. You made your choice a long time ago. He turned to Edward. So did you. Dad, please dash, Edward spoke up, but William interrupted him with a raised hand. Enough, the party is over. William walked towards the door. His voice carried clearly throughout the room. Enjoy your celebration. Starting tomorrow, we'll be talking about consequences. Behind him, the silence was broken only by the sound of Catherine's wine glass shattering on the kitchen floor. William walks to his car with a steady, unhurried pace. The cell phone in his pocket continued to record the panicked conversation that erupted behind him. Oliver was waiting across the street in a black SUV, his military training background keeping him in a hypervigilant stance. Is it all on tape, Dr. Alexander? Every word. William sat in the passenger seat. Contact Morrison and tell him to prepare the legal documents for 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Understood. Oliver confirmed, starting the engine. The security team will be watching the house all night. William nodded and watched through the stained car window as James stormed out of the house, making excited phone calls as he did so. 20 years of betrayal would be capped with precise timing, as it had been with every surgery he'd ever performed. One more thing, William added as they pulled away from the curb. Contact the hospital board. I think it's time to call an emergency meeting about financial irregularities in administration. The next morning, the sun shone brightly, a stark contrast to the storm that was about to erupt. William arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, carrying Morrison's leather briefcase in one hand and Oliver's flash drive in the other. Catherine opened the door in her silk robe, her elaborate makeup unable to hide the signs of a sleepless night. What's this? Her hands shook as she took the envelope William handed her. The divorce papers, William replied calmly while pushing the flash drive to the kitchen island, contained 20 years of surveillance footage, call logs, and proof of bank transfers. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the funds going to an offshore account? You can't prove anything, Catherine snapped, but her face had gone pale as she stared at the flash drive. Every family vacation, every business trip with James, Edward's college fund transfers, it's all here. William stood up and straightened his suit jacket. You have 1 hour to leave the house, and the locks will be changed at 9. You can't do this, Catherine's voice rose. This is my home. Once it was your home, William corrected. Morrison will explain the contents of the temporary restraining order to you. I suggest you read it carefully, especially the sections on electronic communications and financial transactions. I'll fight you to the end, she hissed. James and I will. As he stood in the doorway, William looked back at the woman he had once loved so much. No, Catherine, you lost everything a long time ago. You just didn't realize it until now. He heard Catherine's angry sobs coming through the open window as he walked to his car, but he never hesitated in his steps. In the operating room, hesitation means death. In life, it means something worse, the slow demise of dignity and self-respect. His cell phone vibrated with a text message from Oliver confirming that James had received a similar document at home. William smiled as he started the car. The first cut had been made, and now it was time to remove the tumor that had grown into his life with the same precision with which he had saved countless patients. One more thing, William added as they pulled away from the curb. Contact the hospital board. I think it's time to call an emergency meeting about financial irregularities in administration. A few days later, in Ian Morrison's office, James was pacing the room anxiously while Catherine sat in the leather seat, her well-kept facade beginning to crack. He's got all the evidence, James said, with undisguised panic in his voice. The recordings, the transfers. Sit down, Morrison ordered, the lawyer known for his belligerence flashing a shark-like smile. This isn't the first time I've handled a case involving surveillance. Let's change tactics. Attack his reputation, his credibility. On what grounds? Catherine asked. A control-freak husband obsessed with surveillance, falsifying evidence out of paranoia. Morrison began typing on his laptop. We can ask for a psychological evaluation to question his ability to practice law. James' eyes lit up. I've got contacts I've built up over the years on the hospital board. William's always been an outsider, only concerned about his surgery. Perfect, Morrison said. James, schedule an emergency board meeting. Show your concern for your brother's mental state. But they both underestimated how prepared William was. When James tries to question William's mental state at a board meeting, Oliver brings in financial evidence that slices through their carefully woven lies with the precision of a scalpel. Every suspicious transfer, every record of a secret meeting became irrefutable evidence in court. With the same calmness and precision that William uses in the operating room for every complex case, he is removing the tumor that has been eating away at his life for 2 decades. And this operation has only just begun. The next day's emergency board meeting was held in the hospital's largest conference room. James stood in front of the attending members, and his performance was carefully crafted to show just the right amount of apprehension. William has always been obsessed with control, James said to the board members present, a calculated concern in his voice. And these allegations all stem from his inability to accept the loss of control over Catherine. As his brother, and as someone who cares about him, I have to voice my concerns. Dr. Wade Thompson, chairman of the board, who has quietly supported James in his executive decisions for years, nods sympathetically. This is indeed worrisome. Perhaps a mandatory leave of absence would be wise to allow a professional to assess his mental state. Just then, the door to the conference room was pushed open. William walked in, followed by the stocky Oliver Mason, who was clutching a laptop. Perfect timing, William's voice cut through the whispers. I was thinking of discussing some of the more serious issues, such as the financial irregularities in the hospital's auxiliary account. James' face instantly turned pale. This is a closed-door meeting about your mental health. William had that calm pre-surgery smile on his face. Interesting choice of timing, considering Oliver just found some anomalies in the hospital's charitable foundation's accounts. Oliver quickly connects his laptop to the big screen in the conference room. The numbers began to scroll, followed by a recording. James' voice echoed clearly in the conference room as he discussed the details of the fund's transfer with Wade Thompson. Just go off the equipment budget, James says on the recording. William's too busy with surgery to notice. Thompson's face turned ashen, especially when his own voice also appeared on the recording. A board audit wouldn't have caught it, and if we'd spread the money across several projects. I think, William spoke up in the dead silence that ensued, it's time for us to discuss a different type of vacation. Oliver, please show the transfer records for the Cancer Research Fund. The screen began to display a complex array of financial data. William's voice remained in the same calm tone it had in the operating room. Over the past 5 years, nearly $2 million in research funds have been diverted to various bogus programs. And all of that money has ended up in several offshore accounts. These allegations are ridiculous. James snapped, this is clearly fabricated evidence. William turned to the board members. The documents you have in your hands contain the full audit report. There is a detailed trail of every transfer. And, he paused, I'm sure the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit would be very interested in these records. The entire conference room fell silent. James crumpled back into his seat, his well-prepared performance completely falling apart. Wade Thompson wiped the cold sweat from his forehead while the other board members began talking in hushed tones. Before we move on to my mental health evaluation, William said calmly, perhaps we should talk about the ethics of hospital management. This board meeting became the turning point. Over the next few days, more evidence unraveled like precise surgical incisions, layer by layer, revealing years of fraudulent behavior by James and his co-conspirators. A full audit was immediately initiated within the hospital and James' position was temporarily frozen. In the meantime, divorce proceedings are underway. In Morrison's office, Catherine tries to argue her case on the division of the property, but every attempt is dismissed by hard evidence provided by William. The funny thing about all these years of family vacations, William said in a mediation session, is that each time James happened to be in the same place on business. Every bill, every photo, I've kept them all in good condition. Catherine's temper waned significantly, but she tried to salvage some initiative. You can't deny what I've done for Edward over the years. Payments to Edward? William chuckled softly. Let's see how Edward's college fund was transferred. Oliver, please show Miss Catherine the records of those transfers. When the evidence was laid out in front of her, Catherine finally broke down. You knew, she murmured. You've been waiting, preparing. Like every major surgery, William replied, the timing and preparation must be perfect. By the end of the second part, William's counterattack had been a decisive victory. James' career is on the line. Catherine's divorce proceedings are losing ground, and allies who once supported them are now busy skimming the surface. With the same precision and calmness that William uses in the operating room for every complex case, he is removing the tumor that has been eating away at his life for 2 decades. And this operation has just entered a critical phase. Like a sophisticated surgical instrument, the legal process gradually reveals a deeper deception than William initially anticipated. On a sunny morning, Edward sat in the conference room of his law firm, his tailored suit already wrinkled, and was questioned for hours. You don't understand the gravity of all this, do you? William sat across the long table, his voice calm but with an edge that couldn't be ignored. Every little errand, every piece of paperwork passed around since you were 15 years old, is a piece of this gigantic fraudulent scheme. Edward looked down at the papers spread out in front of him that detailed all of his involvement over the years. They said all of this was to protect the family. His voice was so weak it was almost inaudible. Mom said you were too focused on your career, and we needed to figure it out on our own. Protecting families? William flipped over a new file. Let's see how you protected the family. How many hospital charitable funds did you help transfer when you were 17? Edward's face turned pale. I was just doing what Uncle James said. Uncle, William repeated the word with a hint of sarcasm. Why don't you just call him Dad? That's what you call him in private anyway, isn't it? The words hit the nail on the head with the precision of a scalpel. Edward jerked his head up, shock in his eyes. How did you? I'm a surgeon, Edward. Observing details is my specialty. William pushed over a copy of the DNA test report. Although this report only confirms what I already suspected years ago, Meanwhile, in the hospital board's investigation, the scope of James' fraudulent behavior went far beyond what was initially anticipated. William stood before the board and presented exhibit after exhibit. "It's not just about misappropriated funds," his voice echoed through the room. "How many patient treatment programs have been delayed by these diverted cancer research funds? How many clinical trials have been delayed? We never jeopardized the patient's safety," James argued weakly. "6 months," William interrupted. "The clinical trials for a new breast cancer drug have been delayed a full 6 months because of misappropriated funds. Can you imagine what those 6 months mean to the patients waiting for a cure?" The findings festered quickly like a chain reaction. The hospital's executive committee unanimously approved a resolution to suspend James and refer the material to the state medical board. His carefully managed healthcare management business came crashing down. Catherine's social circle quickly disintegrates with these revelations. The girlfriends who used to pander to her are now distancing themselves from her, especially when the evidence showed how she used the name of her charitable foundation to fulfill a life of personal extravagance. Even the last door of socialization was closed to her. "You know," one nurse whispered to a coworker in the hospital hallway, "Catherine actually wants to be on the country club committee after she embezzled money from those cancer patients." Another nurse scoffed, "She'll be lucky if she doesn't get sued." The final blow came from Edward's trust fund problems. When William's attorneys showed evidence of money manipulation over the years, all the truth came out. Those falsified volunteer hours, one small deception at a time, eventually adding up to a financial fraud that could not be ignored. "He got caught up in it when he was just a kid," Oliver said during a strategy session. "Big enough to tell right from wrong," William replied, examining a new batch of evidence files, "and big enough to take responsibility for his choices." In just a few short months, William's carefully orchestrated counterattack resulted in a decisive victory. James' medical license is suspended indefinitely, Catherine loses her divorce suit in one fell swoop, and Edward, a young man raised on lies, is forced to face the consequences of all his choices. Just as William did in the operating room, every incision was just right, every step calculated and precise. He wasn't destroying a family. He was removing a malignant tumor that had been eating away at his life for 20 years. And it's an operation he's been preparing for a long, long time. The 3 years were like a well-planned surgery, with every step precise and predictable. William Alexander stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse apartment, watching the setting sun color the city skyline amber. The figure reflected in the glass showed a man who had emerged stronger from his betrayal. His steel gray hair now glistened elegantly silver at his temples, and his posture no longer demanded respect, but naturally exuded majesty. The beeping of his laptop computer retrieved his attention from the window to his desk, where the quarterly report for the private practice showed numbers that would be the envy of any hospital administrator. Of course, James won't know any of this. His one-time brother now works at a small clinic in Nebraska, his medical career a shadow of its former glory. "Dr. Alexander," his assistant Sarah said over the intercom, "Dr. Rachel Harrison has arrived for the 6 o'clock appointment." William gave a genuine smile, an expression that had become more frequent in recent months. "Invite her in." Rachel walks in with the confidence that characterizes the chief of trauma surgery. Her dark hair is ably tied back in a bun, and her usual scrubs have been replaced with casual professional attire, demonstrating both her familiarity with the operating room and her deep understanding of hospital management. "The quarterly numbers look good," she said as she scanned the screen, "but I'm more interested in dinner. I have to be back on duty in an hour." Their relationship has blossomed over the past year, built on a shared understanding of dedication and integrity. When the truth comes out about James' embezzlement of hospital funds, Rachel is the head of trauma surgery. "How about Italian food?" William suggested as he grabbed his jacket. "There's a new restaurant dash." His cell phone suddenly vibrated, displaying a new email. The sender's name gave him pause. "Edward Alexander. I need to see you. It's important." Rachel saw the message behind him and had a concerned look on her face. "Are you going to reply?" "Yes." William's voice stayed neutral. "It was inevitable." "The meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday." William sat behind his desk and watched Edward approach through his office window. His one-time son looked much older than his 21 years, his expensive clothes replaced with faded jeans and a worn jacket. "I need help paying for school," Edward said as he got right to the point and sat his butt down in the chair across from William. "Mom and James can't dash." "Before you go on," William interrupted, removing two sealed envelopes from his desk drawer, "take a look at these." Edward's trembling hand opened the first envelope, and the DNA test results clearly demonstrated the devastating truth. The second envelope contains transcripts of conversations over the years in which Edward, James, and Catherine conspired to deceive. "James is your real father," William said calmly, watching the blood drain from Edward's face, "and has been since before you were born. That's why you had to pick a side. You've always been on his side." "Dad, Edward's face scrunched into a frown, the arrogance of graduation day long gone. "I am not your father," William interrupted. "I never was. It was your first betrayal that convinced me I was. We didn't. I didn't know until—" "Until when?" William's voice remained steady. "Until when you started helping them hide evidence? 15, right? Enough to tell right from wrong." Edward slumped in his chair. "Mom said you'd help pay for school, that you wouldn't let your son drop out, that it would hurt your reputation." "My reputation?" William laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "My reputation is built on integrity, Edward. It's something you, James, and Catherine will never understand." "James lost everything," Edward protested. "The clinic could barely feed them. Mom had to sell her jewelry." "Actions have consequences," William interrupted. "Your mother's social circle disintegrated because she stole money from their charitable foundation. James' medical license was revoked because he embezzled cancer research funds. Your college fund was frozen because you helped them hide evidence. These aren't tragedies. This is justice." "So that's it? You just let your son—" Edward braked just in time. William pulled out another folder. "These are lists of cancer patients whose treatment was delayed because James misappropriated research funds. Read them and find out what your real father did to patients who trusted him." Edward's hand trembled as he flipped through the list. "I don't know." "You know enough," William replied. "And now you know more. Consider this my last lesson to you. When Edward leaves the office, William feels no remorse." His cell phone vibrated with dinner plans from Rachel. On the table, photos of the first recipients of scholarships from his new charitable foundation, all children of cancer patients, remind him that family isn't always about blood. The faded wallpaper and aging medical equipment in the small Nebraska clinic speak silently of the passage of time. James, the once powerful hospital administrator, is now confined to dealing with colds and minor injuries in this remote corner of the country. At 58, he'd shed all his sharpness and was known in the clinic as Dr. Andrews. He'd had to switch to his mother's maiden name because the Clark surname had become infamous in the medical community. News clippings about William were piled up under the harsh fluorescent lights in his cramped office. On the latest one, William is receiving a humanitarian award recognizing his charitable foundation for providing medical assistance to underprivileged children. In the photo, William is elegantly poised with a pregnant Rachel standing beside him, and their faces are glowing with happiness. 55-year-old Catherine works as a receptionist at a local dentist's office. Once glamorous, she now wears cheap clothes from discount stores, and her nails, which are no longer meticulously maintained, reveal a life of embarrassment. The town wives talk privately about her past, and that story of betrayal lingers even in this isolated town. William's foundation has opened another free clinic, Catherine said this evening, flipping through the social pages of their rented two-bedroom apartment, and their first child is on the way. "Don't mention it again." James's hand visibly shook as he poured himself a drink. Edward's life is no better. After barely completing community college through night school, he worked as a technician at a pharmacy. When news of William and Rachel's wedding was announced 2 years ago, he attempted to send a congratulatory email, but it was bounced back through the system. William's legal team was strictly enforcing a no-contact order. Oliver Mason's security company now handles security for all of William's charities. Any attempts at contact from these three would immediately trigger legal proceedings. The defense was unbreakable, just like every precise cut William made on the operating table back in the day. In contrast, William's life is flourishing. His private practice has expanded to 3 branches, each with a reputation for excellence in their respective areas of specialization. The charitable foundation he and Rachel created not only supports underprivileged students, but also specializes in a pediatric cancer research center named after a victim of James' fraud. James' ex-wife, Linda, opened a successful rehab center with her divorce share and often shares photos of her European vacations on social media. She gets an invitation to William's wedding, while Catherine's former best friend Sandra returns her wedding invitation. The most ironic blow came from James's mother, who, on her deathbed, amended her will to include a bequest to a medical scholarship program administered by the Williams Foundation, and in her will publicly expressed her shame at her son's behavior. When William and Rachel's daughter, Grace Integrity Alexander, was born, the medical journal story came with the news that a pediatric unit would soon open in her honor. James saw the news on his lunch break and spilled coffee on his faded shirt with shaking hands. Each day brings new reminders: declined credit cards, unheeded social invitations, closed professional doors. That's the price of betrayal. Not a sudden catastrophe, but a day-to-day, subtle punishment. What were once small gestures, those deceptions that they thought were inconsequential, are now shackles from which there is no escape. And on William's desk, the latest security report remains unopened. He had long since stopped needing to know how these former betrayers were doing. His entire focus is on the future: an expanded medical practice, a thriving foundation, and new families built on trust. The most grievous punishment is not notoriety, loss of status, or even financial hardship. Instead, they had to watch from afar as William created something far more brilliant than what they were trying to steal, but were never able to participate in it. As Rachel discusses expanding the scholarship program, William senses the last traces of his past life are dissipating. With surgical precision, he removed life's cancerous tumors and built in their place everything more valuable: a life grounded in truth, anchored by integrity, and enriched by sincere connection. The price of betrayal is heavy, but the rewards of honesty prove that every painful cut is worth it. After all, some choices have lifelong consequences, and this story ultimately proves that integrity is always the best choice. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.